keep it on mute. I could hear the little kids.
There. Should be ready to roll here. What does that mean?
Comes on in.
Yeah. Matt's calling me. He's calling me here. Did Matt not have the invitation? Bear with me here one moment.
Would you like me to add him, Ethan?
Oh, something about lobbies, hey?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, I can add it. Hey,
Hello, this is Lee here.
hey Lee, how you doing?
Oh, pretty good. Let's see how this works here.
Yep, hear you loud and clear. We'll
Okay,
just
right on.
wait another couple minutes. So there was a couple of people from other who haven't picked a seat.
Perfect.
You're gonna want to be here because you're gonna be running it.
We got kombuchas? No thanks, Ethan.
Yeah. Right. Jennifer and Camille.
Hello.
Hello. We'll wait, should we say 2 more minutes?
Sounds good to me.
Sounds good.
Hey, Jennifer, was Reese able to join?
Pizza. Pizza. How's that thing?
She's great.
We should ask you.
It's hard and weird.
That's exactly what it is. How's that thing?
Good.
What's happening to the office here?
Do you have lunch done?
Yeah, exactly.
You
No.
have a wall on the floor.
Wait, what went on the floor? Hey, thanks. Just throwing money around.
Do you like it, Kat? Yeah.
Nobody likes it.
Atta girl.
Duran, nobody
It's a-
likes
It's
it.
a good drink.
Nobody likes kombucha.
You're good. Eric's gonna come.
You bad mouthing kombucha, Erie?
Yeah, I am. Did you hear that, Matt?
Yeah, I did.
Are you a kombucha? Durand has brought a caseload of kombucha into the office.
Why you whistle?
And is handing it out like it's.
I'm jealous.
Are you?
Yeah,
0% juice, it says.
it's great stuff. I make my own.
Do
Good
ya?
job, man. Yeah. Katie made some last year at home and pretty creepy looking those Scooby things.
Yeah, I just had to empty one. It had basically taken over most of the vessel I was brewing in.
Yeah, they just keep drawing.
Pieces here.
Sounds so weird.
Once it fills up that, who knows where it's gonna go?
Yeah, I might devour the earth or something.
Yeah, exactly. Sizing me up while I'm sleeping.
Okay, before we digress too much further, I think we should
Good
proceed.
call.
I'll just say a word or two of introduction, I guess, to those of you. I guess everybody now here has met my dad, Eric Allen. Just a tiny bit of context. Most of you guys already know this, but we got involved about a year or so, maybe a little bit more ago. I did with Marcy. Had an idea to help rehabilitate some groundwater wells in Chad. There was already some data that Loma Linda had acquired through the hospital in Chad, the public health kind of branch of that. Some studies that showed that there were a number of groundwater wells in the community that weren't being used and were broken or dysfunctional. So the grant was put together to investigate it further and towards seeing what we could do to repair and improve the situation. So at the last minute, this culminated in a trip over by staff members from Loma Linda, Reese, Jennifer, primarily, and then Marcy. And Marcy asked me to go kind of at the last minute, and I have a lot of commitments here in Whitehorse, and I said, I don't think I can do it, but I think I know a guy who might be able to do it better than I could. And that's my dad. He's got a wealth of experience as a groundwater well driller over time, as well as a lot of time putting together interesting and innovative solutions for groundwater over time. So he's going to just give us a short presentation on his trip to Chad. So I will hit this button here. I assume everyone can see the screen and it's working fine.
Yep, good for me.
Yeah. Perfect. On to you.
All right. Well, first of all, I want to express my gratitude to Ethan and Marcy and Reese and Jennifer for allowing me a sort of brief participation in this incredibly cool project that's been going on for years. And stems from Marcy having spent a year there in Chad and the incredibly sensitive approach that they have to the local culture there. And it's been a real blessing to me, and I'm super psyched about the whole project and the potential it has to actually bless people. So the real issue that we're looking at with this project is access to water. And it's something that it appears to be a deepening problem. Chad is in the very center of Africa. And if you look at a map of Africa, there's the yellow part at the top, which is the Sahara, and the greener part, which is the sort of middle of Africa. And that green line cuts right through the middle of Chad. And when you fly into the capital and take the 8-hour bus ride south, you're sort of going from the yellow into the beginnings of the green. And it's really a fascinating transition as you move across the landscape. The capital is pronounced N'Djamena, and it's just south of Lake Chad, which is a huge lake, I think the largest in Africa, or at least in the North Africa, and it's slowly, progressively drying up. And I think the statistic that I read was that 3 million people depend on the whole global warming issue, and water is an ongoing challenge. NAD, but I have a Chadian. There's a place in North Chad where there's lots of rock climbing, and Alex Honnold went there and made a really great little video about it, sponsored by North Face. And interestingly, his trip to Chad found these solar energy projects and working with Chad as well. So this is an image that kind of captures the whole thing with water in Chad. And
That's actually you in the photograph, is it not?
yeah. And this is something I drew up showing the real sort of Grand Canyon gulf between a agricultural-based, oftentimes nomadic culture that has existed on a marginal landscape for thousands of years and have figured out how to actually survive and thrive and build a culture around that. And then our culture, which is on the other side of that vast gulf, suddenly sort of zooming in there with all kinds of solutions. So I'd like to talk right at the beginning based on, I'm speaking more to my own colonial self here and to any of the rest of you, because I think that for myself in particular, it's very easy to sort of assume that we have the solutions because we're part of a dominant culture. One of the things that I find really interesting in Scripture is that it speaks of God, or however you want to conceive the sort of basic underlying reality of the universe, as having caused the rain and the sun to shine on the righteous and the wicked equally. So, and that is the perfection of the Father. So what we see here is a graphic showing that from God's perspective, there is no difference between the righteous and the wicked, and we would maybe ask ourselves which ones are the righteous and which ones are the wicked here. So I think I'd like to speak briefly to the issue of charity versus solidarity. A perspective of charity comes from a dominant culture assisting a culture that is perceived to be behind or less advanced or whatever. And solidarity is always a two-way street in a relationship that's based on equality. So if we look at our culture and our industrial way of living in comparison to a culture that has built thousands of years of tradition on existing and thriving and surviving in a marginal landscape, we would have to ask ourselves which one is the primitive one and which one is the advanced one, and walk into the situation. This is a quote from Rachel Held Evans, peace be upon her. She quotes Jesus here as giving his mandate and what the Spirit of the Lord has anointed him to do, and it's to proclaim good news to the poor, proclaim liberty to the captives, sight to the blind, and liberty to those who are oppressed. And Timothy Keller's response is very interesting. Right away, he says Jesus didn't come primarily to solve economic, political, and social problems of the world. He came to forgive our sins. And so as we carry on into this, I would just like us to think about what sins might he have come to forgive, and maybe some of them are ours. We arrived after an 8-hour bus trip from the capital in a place called Kalo, and there's another what feels like 2 hours of bumpy road, which Marcy assures me is only three quarters of an hour, 45 minutes. We had 12 pieces of luggage, and Marcy says, well, here's the 3 motorbikes, we're going. And so you can see they don't have bungee cords or ratchet straps. They just use inner tubes. And there's 5 pieces of luggage on this bike, and the driver is going to ride it sitting up on the fuel tank. So this shows you how incredibly resourceful and what incredible dignity these people have and how they function within the limitations of what is available to them. There's me on the other bike with another 3 pieces of luggage, and I think Marcy had 4 on her bike. And this shows the sort of beauty and color of Africa. This is Reese doing a DO test and gathering valuable data. This is Jennifer keeping accurate records and doing a wonderful job. You have to see these folks in action to appreciate what they're doing. This is a typical hand-dug well. You can see the reflection at the bottom there. There's water. The static in this is probably between 20 and 25 feet. I didn't actually measure it because we didn't have the dipper tape. And you can see that it's cased for about the first 10 feet with brickwork, which I presume is because the soil would collapse. But it's a semi-soft sandstone below that, and it's just open hole. And this particular well had about 6 inches of water in it at the very end of the dry season. And that water was full of bugs, turbidity to the level where you would almost call it mud. And we pulled up a bucket full of it and a frog jumped out. And the frog brilliantly jumped out of the bucket and fell all the way back down to the well. I think he knew he was toast if he stayed on the surface. So this is a typical India Mark II, which is the ubiquitous hand pump throughout Africa. Reese estimated that there's literally millions of these around Africa. They're built in India and they're super strong and robust. And I believe that the keyhole shape of the cement is to protect the wellhead and to allow any sort of recharge of the aquifer to be channeled away from the wellhead and allow it to percolate back down into the aquifer through more of a formation and a more cleaner formation where it doesn't have any of the residual effects of the drilling. So when we got there, I didn't know anything about these wells or these pumps, and I was supposed to somehow teach people about them in a couple of days. And so priority was to get this thing ripped out of the ground and at least see what was wrong with it and what might be done. So we did some really scary stuff with big pipes up in the air threatening to crash down on people. But we got it out the first day and had it out on the ground and took it apart, and we could see what it is and what was wrong with it and what the issues are. Also in this picture, it's nice to see the iron staining. Pretty much all of the wells that we looked at had the same kind of iron staining due to soluble iron in the water. This is Naomi, who is the sort of head of the community health rep program, and she speaks good English and she's absolutely amazing. This woman does a wonderful work, and teamed up with Marcy, these 2 women will definitely change the world.
What is she doing with that?
What's going on? That's a life straw, and I think someone donated a bunch of them to Marcy's project, and it allows you to basically suck any liquid and not kill yourself. So if you're in a survival situation and you find a little mud puddle and you're dying of dehydration, having one of those could literally save your life.
Idea.
So here I am, the typical white guy with all the answers, who actually, in fact, knows nothing. And you can see the women and their body language. Here,
We've been through this before.
here we go again.
Not happening.
But we did manage to do a little bit of something, and we figured out how not to do things. And once the community health reps got into actually doing the pipe work, and I was just standing by, it became really clear that they were better at this than I was. I was so flustered by my incompetence and not knowing what was going on. Often I was trying to pull the wrench in the wrong direction and feeling like an idiot. But in the end, everybody seemed to be happy with what it was, and I felt like the great expense and my travel all the way there wasn't a total loss. And so here we are on our way. If you ever do go to Chad, one of the big survival advice I get is to check the foam on the motorbike seat before you get on, because my ass is still busted from that ride on that particular bike. The one with the pink seat is the one you want to stay away from. And I think Marcy rode on that one on the way in, and I think she's still suffering.
Driver's sandals just hanging on there.
But the driver was awesome, doing an amazing job with what he had. So I just want to finish up with some discussion of maybe ways in which we can help the situation in Chad. And I found this quote: when you start with an understanding that everyone is your neighbor and we're all equal, justice is not far behind. So I think that's a kind of guiding principle. And we have the do for others what you would like done to you. We need to keep these two principles as we work forward. And we have to remember that there is a legacy of colonialism, and it's very easy for colonials to imagine that they have all the answers. And we have to always seek the root causes of why people are marginalized in the larger pictures of colonial oppression, and add various other forms of oppression. So some of the problems that I see, which I think maybe are our sins that Tim Keller was talking about, poverty and marginalization being a legacy of colonialism, climate change a legacy of industrialization, access to understanding assembly and disassembly and repair of the technologies that are available, and socially and educationally engineered inferiority complexes. And one of the biggest ones we were up against was that there was no hardware store. So solutions, they should be built from locally available resources, accessible and locally repairable. I'm thinking that it would, from the doing unto others as you would have them do unto you, moving towards private residential water systems rather than community-based systems that break down and no one knows who owns them and whose responsibility is to repair them. Excited by the idea of direct solar pumping, where you just hook a solar panel directly to a pump and the water flows whenever the sun is shining, which the sun pretty much always shines in Chad. So I think that's a very simple technology and could be life-saving and life-transforming for a lot of people. I'm really excited about the idea of homemade plastic pumps. And this is an step where we have a lot of hand-dug private wells that go dry and have obvious sanitation issues, that they could be shock chlorinated and fitted with, and sealed and fitted with a simple, easily manufactured plastic hand pump, and would be a step in the direction of people being able to control their own water source and be responsible for maintaining it. And I'd like to talk about alternative drilling methods because Lee and I are super psyched on that kind of stuff. There's a organization in Zambia called Smart Centers. It stands for Simple, Market-Based, Affordable, Repairable Technologies. And this is one of their super simple well drilling ideas. It's basically a check valve, which you can see in the lower part of the photograph, which is basically a washer inside of a reduction fitting, and a piece of pipe, which you take your grinder and cut teeth into, and then fit the valve in the junction where you re-weld it back in there. And it's got a neck on it with a piece of poly pipe, and you jerk that thing up and down and with water in the bottom of the hole, and the slurry goes up into through past the check valve, and then you pull it out and dump it, and you put it back down again. So you don't need threaded drill rod or anything like that. You just have to just keep going away at the hole. So I think that's pretty cool from a. And this Smart Centers has a website, and all of these things that I'm showing you are downloadable and for instruction manuals on how to do it. This is another approach to making a hole called a soil punch. It's very similar to the kind of soil sampling stuff that Ethan has, but it's a way of starting a hole in the ground with basic tools. EMAS is a bunch of missionaries out of Bolivia, I think, that have come up with really cool PVC plastic, real simple pumping technology that is accessible to anybody with access to basic pipe fittings and PVC pipe. This is a rope pump, which gives a lot more volume, liters per minute than, say, the Indian Mark II. The problem with it is that it's more easily contaminated because the rope circulates in a loop up through the pipe. But this would be really appropriate in projects for agriculture and watering gardens in the rainy season. And it's really home built, simple, accessible technology. There's also the straight-on post-hole digger approach. There's a website called emergencywaterwells.com, and the guy claims he can put a 50-foot well in and complete it in 2 hours using this technology. I imagine that's in perfect ground, whatever, but you can see it's very affordable. Then there's the Baptist method, which is one that I really admire. It's a check valve and a casing that comes all the way to the surface, and then it discharges out the surface. So you don't have to pull the whole thing out every time. And you can see that arrow-shaped thing is a check valve that both drills and
Michael's not muted now.
Hello? Hello?
Ethan said,
Hi, Ethan.
Hey, sorry about that. It appears we got knocked off the internet a minute or two ago. Can anyone confirm how long we've been missing?
I'd say about 30 seconds, maybe.
Oh, that's not bad.
Less than a minute.
Not bad. We'll get back on the horse here. Just, oh, we're recording. It says stop recording, so we are recording. Okay. Okay, there we were.
So as the drills get heavier, you can use it and I'm intrigued by, and generally of local residents that would all like to have they donate equipment and teach them how to use it, and then the club goes around and assists everyone within the community to end up with their own water source. So I have a lot of respect for that model. This is another approach which excites me a little. Airlift pump. Drawback of it is that you need an air compressor, but air compressors are all over the place in Chad because they use them as tire repair. So you actually see lots and lots of air compressors in Chad. The 5-horse Honda driving. So this is the bit. It's a 4-inch nipple cut in half with 4 teeth welded around the edge. And then the auxiliary tooth that you see there is to cut clay towards the center of the cutting action, and should be removed if you're in gravel or larger material. And you can see the fitting on the side is the airline, and it can be either fitted with a U-shaped tube that goes into the bore, and then with this technology, you're injecting the air right at the bit, and it's essentially bubbling the cuttings and the material out and up through the pipe. And you can put ports in the side of your pipe that you can open and close with these rubber union. So this is the bit on the PVC drill rod. This is a woman drilling with this method, and she seems pleased with the result. And this is a variation on that method where you use polypipe instead of solid drill rod, and they use a air die grinder on the end of the drill string that actually spins and drills into the formation, and the cuttings come up the polypipe and are discharged into that barrel and then recirculated. And if you're excited by the idea of the miracle of water in Chad, I recommend watching this video. It's only 15 minutes long, and it's elegant and will fuel your psyche for helping out in Chad. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Will you take some questions?
Sure. Clap.
I have a question, just kind of circling back to your mandate, what you did there. If you could just provide a little bit more detail on, certainly from our perspective on the project, how we were involved is, there was an information gathering part of it around basic water quality parameters. And then at the end of it, there was supposed to be kind of some decisions made about what to do, whether it was repairing pumps, doing shock chlorination, whatever other possible interventions there were. Once you were there, you kind of saw the realities on the ground, kind of what you did and what you kind of see in terms of this particular project, wrapping it up, or you've given us here on kind of maybe another direction. But you kind of, and maybe Marcy or somebody else can comment as well, where you're not kind of sure where it went after you left.
Yeah, my understanding
So-
of the approach was that we were going to try and repair as many of the broken wells as we could.
So you focused on repairing mechanically broken wells.
What I focused on was, yeah, well, shock chlorination, we were ready to do that, but we ran out of time. But the idea of rehab was based around mechanically repairing and shock chlorination.
Yeah. Okay. And as I undertake it, maybe based on previous conversation with you, again, a lot of these mechanical wells were broken, and because they were part of the common, they were drilled by an NGO or whatever. There was no real ownership, and so nobody kind of knew whose it was or who was supposed to repair it. Kind of issue number one. Number two, there wasn't anyone sort of qualified or who knew how to repair it. Number three, access to parts was an issue. So I guess what you ended up focusing on while you were there is that you were going to go in and kind of figure this out, and then teach some of the locals kind of how to, through Loma Linda, how to kind of carry that torch forward.
Yeah, we sort of miraculously, providentially acquired the two critical tools that you need to work on an India Mark II, which are the two clamps for both the sucker rods and the outer riser pipes. And so those are there in Chad now. And what we were trying to do was to transfer the ability to repair and to shock chlorinate a well that breaks within that community. And so they don't have to rely on somebody from 3 hours away that knows how to pull a pump and repair it and put it back down and make sure that it's sanitary. So that was kind of my focus while I was there, was to be able to set that up so that could go forward.
Thank you. If you'll allow me one more question. Kind of around again, there's this community in Chad. None of us here in this room have been there to see it, but it's a fairly large community, and there's something like 35 or 37 wells in the whole community, kind of interspersed. So that means that literally everyone in that community at some point, each household kind of has to go to one of these wells and physically pump water and then hike to their house. So the impact of having even a handful or a lot of these wells going down is that if you're near that well, then you have to walk an extra certain distance each day to kind of get your daily water ration. That's the implication.
And a lot of the children end up being the ones. If you watch this video, The Miracle of Water in Chad, it's about a little kid who not only has to haul all the water for the family, but also has to provide daycare for their younger sibling. And what that means for a lot of children is that they don't get to go to school and they don't get access to a lot of other.
Because they're literally hauling water all day.
They're literally hauling water and providing childcare, and these kids are between, sometimes as young as 5 years old, that are packing the babies all day doing what they're doing. So if we can do something for them, it'll be a huge thing. And I think my instinct is that ultimately, if we want to do to them what we would have done for ourselves, that it would be really nice for everybody to move towards having their own water supply in their own house.
And we sure all, I think, appreciate that.
We all kind of like that. And so with the solar panels and direct pumping, and there are some fairly simple pathways to that goal, and there are a lot of already existing hand dug wells there. So one of the things I didn't mention was that this airlift pumping works really well for deepening existing wells, existing hand dug wells, because the cleaning action goes up the center of the drill rod, so it'll clean whatever diameter hole you're working on. It just sucks the material up from the bottom. So the idea of deepening and making some of the existing hand dug wells, that pretty much everybody has a hand dug well, but they're not sanitary and whatever. So I think there's
And the other problem would be that they're not, they're not deep enough, as the one picture showed right at the beginning that Eric was looking down at. A lot of them aren't deep enough, and it would be dangerous to dig any deeper as well, for just that open pit.
Yeah.
And then it dries out during the dry season.
So the airlift pumping technology that you saw with that woman and the spout of cuttings coming out, I think that has a lot of potential.
Marcy, could you or somebody else, if more appropriate for the moment, just give your perspective on how, what the steps are in terms of wrapping up this project, and maybe your idea of what the next phases or next steps are?
Right. Reese and Jen, jump in whenever you'd like to on this too. So the way we wrapped it up is and Ethan, you can speak to this as well. The chemical issues with the wells didn't seem to be quite as problematic as we had originally thought, and could be solved fairly easily at this point if we taught them how to do like a charcoal filter. So we have left the information for creating charcoal filters, and they can be using those at the interim time as far as dealing with more of the chemical issues. And then the broken wells were actually a bigger problem, and it seemed to be actually the low-hanging fruit at this point in helping them get those fixed. Jen and Reese were incredibly impressed. They went to one more well, so there's 2 wells that were fixed before Jen and Reese left Chad. Both were at schools. Both have been working for quite a while, and we're the only source of water for the schools. And so it was very nice to have some water for the kids. They can't just take off and go running off with water during breaks. So they told me that they were incredibly impressed with the selected community health person and ability to fix the well all on their own. So going forward, each of the community health workers now are the wellhead because they're and more and access down the well because of that. There's some contamination that way. We wanted to be engaged in the process as much as possible, and that engagement, they would come with a plan to keep clean, keep.
Sorry, you've broken up.
Hey,
And
Hey, Marcy, you broke up for the last 2 minutes. We haven't heard you for the last 2 minutes.
All right, I will better question here. So
Good.
the main thing is we want the community to take ownership. So before we are going to repair the physical well, the Mark IIs, we want the community to come up with a way that they are going to maintain the wellheads. So that's what those selected community health workers and Naomi are going to work with each of the neighborhoods within that within the town of Bere to do. And once they have a good plan, then we've left all the parts like Eric had talked about, and those community health workers are now going to be able to go in and fix those wells. As far as going forward on this project, my goal is to continue to address the water issues, get back in there, talk. Eric had mentioned the shock chlorination. We weren't able to implement that yet, all the parts and the ways of doing that we have there on site. We just need to get the training done. So I'm looking at writing for another grant to continue this project. I think everything Eric's been talking about with being able to let them drill their own wells could be an amazing opportunity to reach out to the communities around this town as well. Those communities are probably in need of this project even more. Bere is a fairly big town and has a few more resources, and even with that, they have some serious water issues, and they are wealthier than the neighboring villages. So you can just imagine how bad the problems are there. So we want to continue the water project as well as some other aspects to public health with another grant that would be hopefully funded next spring. So all of these ideas, all of this innovation, I would love to build into this next grant and continue to work on these projects. That's.
And my apologies, I meant to actually send you sort of the notes that Lee took from the meeting that we had over the weekend, and I didn't do that yet, but I certainly will today.
Yeah, no, I just have to write in just a letter of intent so far. It doesn't have to have a lot of details. So we have this summer. I have to have the grant written by the end of this summer. So we have some time.
Perfect.
And I'd love everyone on this meeting. I know Ethan and Eric invited you guys specifically, so you have ideas. I think the concept that Eric is talking about good innovation from local products is fantastic. And that's what we need to be doing. That's why I hadn't addressed this water issue before, because they kept telling me, oh, these are issues. So I didn't have the money to just pay somebody from somewhere else to come in and keep drilling wells. They keep paying for people to come fix them, and they do something, but it just breaks again. The Indian Mark IIs are not known for being, lasting a long time. And so we really wanted the community to stop just paying out tons of money to corrupt repairmen, or even if they were good repairmen, to not understand what was going wrong. And just maintenance takes time and effort and everything else, but they really felt we want them to feel empowered on maintaining them themselves and knowing what's going on and being able to repair them themselves at the lowest cost possible. I hope all of that came through this time. Right.
Yeah, it got much better.
It was good.
Okay.
Hey guys, this is Ryan. I joined late. Hi Eric and Ethan. I just had a question about were you all able to get data on the depth of the wells and the type of all the geology about it, and are you sure that kind of method would work for all of the different wells, or for all of the different environment there in Bere and then the surrounding villages, and then also about the let's see. Yeah, I'm just asking that question first, and I have some other ones too. But yeah, were you able to figure out the depth of water in the dry season?
Yeah, it was interesting. The well that we opened had a static level of about I think it was 14 or 13 feet.
Mm-hmm.
And Naomi's well, which is a hand dug well in her yard, had a static level of like 45.
And that was in the dry season, is that correct?
And that's in the dry season. So my impression was that the permeability of the formation is fairly slow, and drawdown is an issue with the use over time. So I didn't, and the depth of the other well that we opened was about 70 feet, and I think that most of the wells there vary between say 70 and 100 feet. The borehole wells.
So most of those borehole wells there's no perched aquifer that you're in, or it's like they're not super deep. They're just 100 feet or less.
Yeah, well, that's based on limited information from conversations with people and what we measured. That's the best, to the best of my knowledge at this point. I could be totally wrong, but and The cased part, even on the borehole wells, appears to be only the top 10 to 15 feet with 4-inch PVC, and then it's open hole from there on.
Oh yeah, that can be, improved a lot as well. So I missed your first part of the presentation, or most of your presentation. So, but oh, and then I was going to ask about the pumps. Like, what's your preferred type of pump, other than the India Mark II, I guess?
My preferred type of pump?
Yeah, for going out there. Like I know in the Central African Republic they use this foot pump, and I saw that you had a few pictures of there maybe one or two of those out there. But what kind of pump would you want to have on these wells if you could drill more?
Direct solar electric.
Okay, so that's the part I missed then. Yeah.
I mean, that being said, that's obviously not realistic, and I think that the India Mark II is the standard thing that has parts availability across the continent, and I think for the foreseeable, until we can come up with something that's better, I think the India Mark II is doing an amazing job, and it's probably the best thing given the context.
Okay, so did you ever get the chance to investigate those foot pumps, where you stand on it and then you push it down and then that draws the water up? Because that's the model that Water for Good and some other groups around Africa are using as well. And there's obviously a debate about which one's the best one, but just wondering if you had any more insight on that.
Yeah, I saw I think a couple of those, and I was intrigued by them, but I really didn't get a chance to pull one apart, and I don't know how they work, and they look like they're more vulnerable to surface contamination and dirty feet pumping on them and stuff like that than the India Mark II. But they do look really efficient energy-wise. Like if I was a little kid and needing to pump my daily water supply, they look like they would require less energy for a given volume of water, for sure.
Yeah, that's probably true. In Central African Republic, they do that. They say you have to take your shoes off if you go up on the well apron and start working with that pump. But I mean, we all know that that's not probably the most practical sort of way to reduce the wellhead contamination, but it kind of gives them the idea that, look, you don't want to contaminate it, so if you have to take your shoe off for some reason. So, yeah. So I don't know. I mean, just checking in on that. I know this. You're probably talking about the solar stuff, but what about what would be a lower hanging fruit? And is it the India Mark II? Are those the least expensive? And that's another question I guess we can keep talking about.
I'm super psyched on the EMAS pump, the PVC plastic, sort of home built. You go in and you basically teach people to build their own pumps using a glass marble as the check valve. And on a private residential scale, I think that has huge potential. As a public pump, it would break in 2 hours. But if it's something that you can teach people and they can understand it and they can repair it themselves, and they can monitor its use, respectful of it, I think it has a lot of potential.
Another good one that I used in Cambodia, which ADRA was using pretty much in all their wells in Cambodia 10 years ago, was the treadle pump. And that has the actual pump part on the surface, and it's good down to about, I think, 30 or 50 feet or so, because the pulling action is at the surface. But the benefit is you just change out the seals really easy because it's all up there. You don't have to pull anything out. But that would be for more of the shallow ones, I guess. But they're able to seal it and have a really good hygienic sort of pump as well. But yeah, there's lots of different options, and I think what you're talking about. I'm wanting to see the recording that Marcy's making or whatever of this. So.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of really great stuff out there that's people who have been working on this problem for a long time. So I'm kind of new to it and just feeling my way around.
Yeah, and I think, the India Mark II is there for a reason. So, I mean, it's a good pump. So.
Yeah, for sure.
And then, did you go over any of the data that I missed? I'm not sure. I'm not asking you to redo your presentation, but one of the things that I was looking at is, you know, a lot of the wells, they had arsenic, but the arsenic wasn't all that much higher than 10. Now, you don't want to ever recommend that somebody drink water that has arsenic in it. But in the case that, you know, you don't recommend a well that they drink it, was there these situations where, okay, they can't drink that water because it has arsenic, but what's the other option for them? If they don't drink that well, you know, until we fix it, it has arsenic. What's the other option?
We didn't really, it seemed like we were more talking about the mechanical and looking at mechanical options going forward, if I'm not incorrect here, Eric. We didn't go over and because of the nature of who's on, the rest of the people on this conversation, we hadn't gone over the chemical issues for this meeting yet. So, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll talk about that later then.
Yeah, I would.
Yes.
Sort of the guy that pulls wrenches. I leave the chemistry stuff that people know
Understood. Yeah.
about it.
No.
We maybe recap that really. You know, Ryan and some of my colleagues at here definitely looked at that data, and I would say a summary of it is that there were a couple parameters that did exceed drinking water recommendations. Arsenic was one of the major concerns, and then some aesthetic objectives. Obviously, some of the water was pretty turbid and had high iron, and you know, people were complaining. But overall, our conclusion was that there was all of the wells that we looked at data, there was nothing that was really incredibly grossly, you know, terrible, as in make sure you don't drink this or you're going to get sick for sure. Most of it was pretty close to guidelines, or the primary objective into drinking it would have been aesthetic.
Yeah, and Ryan's point about if they don't drink this, what are their other options? Is a good one.
Yeah.
Hey, yeah, I was really encouraged to see the low bacteria numbers in them as well, and I also think that our guys, or Jennifer and Reese on the ground doing all that, I think that they did a good job with the micro data, because they did get micro results for HBCs and they didn't get it as much for the E. coli. I think they only have one E. coli, and that was really neat. That, you know, that those wells actually are fairly hygienic.
Yeah, that was encouraging. I know when we first started talking about the project, we talked about flooding in the rainy season and wellhead protection as being really big concerns. Now, mind you, of course, this is the dry season. It would be interesting to see to test those wells again when it was flooding conditions, and see if they stayed hygienic during those times.
Yeah.
I agree, and that might be a really good project piece to add into the next grant.
I don't mean to hijack the conversation. Sorry, you know, this is more of the well idea.
No, that's fine.
Yeah.
No, it's all part of it.
Hey, I missed the first part of this. Are you all in a room somewhere?
Does anyone else have any questions for Eric or general comments?
I'm not sure if you guys can hear me again. I really appreciate all of the work that both the students and Eric did over there.
They're in a room here for geoscience, but we're not all together in one place.
Okay.
Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you, Marcy. I think there's maybe a little bit of time lag or something.
Okay, all right. I'm walking back out to get better reception. I just wanted to thank Reese and Jennifer and Ryan and Ethan and Eric for all of the work that they've done on this, and Michael too. Whatever ideas you guys are coming up with are going to be fantastic. I'd love to have all this input. I know there's a lot of people on this call who have a ton of knowledge in this area, and I'm really excited that Eric and Ethan put this together, because I would love to look at what options there are going forward that be cheap, inexpensive, and can really empower these communities. So thank you guys so much for your interest in this. And I look forward to all your comments going forward.
Perfect. Thank you, Marcy. It is 1:00 now, so to be respectful of everyone's time, I adjourn. Yeah, feel free to with myself as a point contact person at Core Geoscience, and entertain questions by email or elsewise if anyone has any follow-up questions. So, any last remarks?
Thanks for all your hard work, Aaron, and
say that anybody who wants to be part of, Lee and I are forming a sort of a project to explore inexpensive Africa appropriate drilling technology, and anybody would be
okay. With that, thank you very much, everyone, for your